Well, I think all of us carry shame, all of us carry regret, and all of us carry stories and things that have been done to us and things that we've done to other people that we simply don't want to acknowledge.
Welcome to the From Within podcast with Ben Osterveld. Okay, this is Ben Osterveld from the From Within podcast. We got Philip McKernan. We are pumped to have Philip. He is doing something that is called the One Last Talk. We're going to get into that. It's not just the book. The book is more like the fruit of the tree in a way. And we're going to dig into that. It's Philip.
I'm really good. Actually, it's great. Really super to be here.
Awesome. Why don't you just give a quick hitter right between the eyes? What is this One Last Talk? What's it all about?
So basically, imagine an event like TED, if you like, where people stand on a stage and give the one last talk they'll ever give in 15 minutes or less. So in other words, the last talk they'll ever give before they die. They're not necessarily dying, even though arguably we could say all of us are dying at some level every day. But so it's basically, it's a place where people come and focus the mind and open their hearts and share a part of their personal truth, not their story, because that can be different, in order to free themselves and free humanity from unnecessary suffering is basically how I describe it.
Philip, I've known you for a long time, and I can feel you are on, my friend.
I'm ready to go. I've never felt more unapologetic in my life.
Never say that again. Sorry.
I've never felt more unapologetic in my life as I do today.
I feel it instantly. I'm just listening to you and watching you. I'm like, here we go. This is good. This is good. Okay. So let's go back to this One Last Talk. I'd like to talk about the origin story. I always love to go to the origin story first. I've had the privilege of knowing you for a long time and being kind of part of that origin story in at some level in Tofino. And would you like to, I don't know how you will, but just explain, where does this idea come from? Because it wasn't always called the One Last Talk at first, right?
No, it was born out of inspiration to some extent, but also a lot of frustration. And as I travel the world, as indeed you do and many others do, going to different events and then having the privilege to speak at many of these events, what I was witnessing and noticing was, let's just call it an inauthenticity from a stage. So I would meet copious amounts of speakers who, maybe it's a bit of slightly embarrassed saying this, not just did I admire, but in some ways I wanted to literally be Ben. Like I would look at them and go, oh my God, I want to be that guy. And when I wasn't, then I would compare myself and say, you know what, I'm not that guy. I'm not good enough. So I had all these weird nuances to it. And I would meet some of these, this often said you should never meet your hero, but I'd often meet these men and women, not all of them, but some of them, and a large majority of them. And I would meet them and just be in awe of them and see them speak on stage and often get to hang out with them behind the scenes. And I realized that who they were on stage and who they were in real life was dramatically different on many occasions, like dramatically different. Yeah. And I've often had people, when I say this, say things like, oh my God, it's amazing. But this speaker that I followed for years, like I know he's not like that. And I go, have you met him? And they go, no. And I said, well, how do you know? So that's number one. Number two is, if people are sitting here going, oh, here's a guy who does some speaking. He's just on a hate campaign against other speakers. If that's your view, great. Dismiss it if that's what you want to do. But it's not that. It's just realizing, and by the way, am I any different? I'm not the guy to say. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, I'm different because of X, Y, and Z. You decide. That's not for me to decide. That was number one. I wanted to change the landscape. I wanted to disrupt the event space and challenge that status quo. The second thing is, I believe the greatest gurus at any event, anywhere in the world, is not necessarily the person standing on stage. It's the beautiful men and women, the souls, the hearts, and the minds of the men and women sitting in the audience. And I wanted to create an event to allow them to stand on that stage and to share their personal truth. And they are two of the kind of the main principles. And the final piece is, we often go to events where there's a success story, or look how I built my business, or you can 10x your life too. And a lot of that is very valuable. But there needs to be a place where we can pretend a place where we're not pretending we're happy on Facebook every day, where we can come and not download, but say, hey, life is not rosy. Life is not perfect. I've had these ups and downs. So we can allow people know anywhere in the globe that when they're having a bad day, they're not alone, because there's an epidemic, there's a pandemic of loneliness on this earth. And you can have all the Twitter followers, 5,000 Facebook friends, have a business of 50 people, lie next to somebody every night and still be deeply lonely inside of your own soul. We want to change that.
That's all.
That's all.
That is extremely.
And I didn't even talk about Defino, which is that's the bigger picture. And then
that's amazing. I think we're getting the heart of it, Philip. We're getting the absolute heart and the why behind it. And I love that. I love naturally go to that as well. I'm just. And
actually, one of the things, Ben, I've never shared this. Sorry, there's a delay.
Go ahead.
So it looks like I'm speaking over you, and I apologize. That's not my intention.
It doesn't.
So when many years ago, I remember sitting in an event. I can't remember the event, and even if I did, it probably wouldn't feel appropriate to mention it. I believe it was in Dublin, in Ireland. I wasn't happy. Now, my brain was telling me that what I'm doing and where I'm going was rationalizing, justifying that this is going to be good. You're on the right path. But my heart knew, my soul knew I was out of alignment. I was not happy in my own skin. And I went to this event because I wanted to better myself. And so at least I was being productive. I was doing something. And I remember a guy standing on stage talking about meditation, and that he pretty much insisted that if you're not meditating for 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the evening, that you are going to be pretty much challenged in life. And I remember in that moment going, oh, I get it. Finally, the missing piece is meditation. Now, by the way, in case anybody's listening and you're a mad meditated fan, brilliant. Meditation is a beautiful, beautiful tool, but it's not the answer to anything necessarily in a very direct sense, but it can support and enhance a journey on this earth. I go home, Ben, I meditate for 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes in the afternoon, 7 days in a row. At the end of the week, here's what happened. I hated meditation. I hated the person that told me about meditation, but most importantly is I despised myself because I said to myself, you can't even meditate. That's how much of a loser you are. So I left this event feeling inadequate, not empowered. Now I see meditation as a tool, not something that I do a lot myself personally, but seeing as a tool, but not necessarily an answer. And that was another, if you go back beyond Tofino, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a minute, if you go back to my own personal narrative, I think the real origin story starts in the pain and the joy of my own life, in the things that I saw, the things I had, and in many cases, the things I didn't have.
Yeah. It's so good, Philip. It's so good. I'm just taking it in myself, to be honest. I'm just thinking about, you mentioned something. I was thinking, I've got all these questions about people's stories, because the whole idea is to share your one last story on stage. And within seconds, you threw all my questions out because you said it's not about the story, it's about their truth. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and thanks for that, Ben, because that's just an amazing clarifying point. And secondly, sorry for messing up your questions, but somebody's.
How can you say sorry to me?
Yeah, no, you know what I mean.
You've messed up every single thing I've ever done almost. Always turned out. So we're good.
No, you know what I mean. So somebody's story might be, I grew up in a little village in Ireland. I was challenged as a young man. I went to school. I didn't go to secondary or second level, what would they call it, like a college or whatever. I got a job. I drove around Ireland, my little van. I mean, this is just my story. But that's my story. But my truth is how I was feeling in those moments, in the gaps. My truth is what was actually going on for me. And what was actually going on for me was I was a young man who had very little confidence. I was a young man who was reeling in pain. I was a young man who at the age of 14 or so years old went to his own mother and asked, could I change my first name, Philip? And if I could change my name, maybe I could change my identity. If I could change my name, maybe I could take on a persona that didn't have the pain that I've had. If I could change my name, I could reinvent myself. It shows how much pain I was in that a young man wants to change his name, his identity, and become something else in order to mask it. That's my truth. That's my truth. But my story is often something different. And why does truth matter? I believe it's the only thing that matters. because you can build a business. I literally got off a coaching call 20 minutes ago from a man who got to the top of the mountain in his mind, the top of the mountain, the pinnacle of his career, millions of dollars working for a company all of us know, building this brand, houses in different parts of the world, country club, everything else. And he looked around and he realized that there was something missing. Yeah. And many of us reach those pinnacles and we don't stop and really take stock of what is missing. What we're too busy doing is creating the next mountain, building the next business, building more chaos, busyness in our lives, and not stopping. So that's the difference. And hopefully that makes sense between truth and story.
Yeah, no, it completely does. And a story can be really polished, if you know what I mean. Story can, like, oh, I was in this van. Like, it's almost like I think about a storyteller. But a truth teller it's like we bring in a storyteller, it's almost entertaining and it's almost captivating. I think the truth teller is not someone you'd bring in. It's like the truth teller, it almost feels like it's harder or challenging or even darker than the story. You know what I mean? As you describe your difference of little Ireland and then telling you how much pain you were in, it's like, oh, well, let's go back to the other one. Like, how was that bus? You know, the natural is to go that way, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of one last talk, how does it show up? So, for example, you know, people often think, like, we get people reaching out to us saying, "Hey, I want to do a one last talk. I built this really cool business, and I've got this really great success story." I go, "That's not a one last talk." So, somebody at a speaker workshop, which we run to support speakers, often said recently their opening line was, "There are so many people in the world that are out of alignment in the work they do." And I go, "Excuse me, sir, that is not a one last talk. A one last talk in that context starts with this line: I spent 15 years of my life doing work I didn't want to do and being out of alignment." You don't go you go I. And you show people, don't tell them. You allow people to journey with you through this narrative, through this truth, and find the pieces in your truth that resonates with them. And a real life example of a story versus truth is Chris, who you and I both know. We tend to not use second names because a lot of the talks hold deep sensitivities that we want to be protective of. Chris spoke in Vancouver, and what was so beautiful about his talk was when I asked him to speak, most people's reactions are, "Hey, you want me?" Now, I know a guy, Ben, like, you should talk to Ben. Ben is a great story. But in other words, what we're saying is my story doesn't matter, which I disagree with immensely. Does everybody have a one last talk? Do I think everyone has a one last talk? Absolutely not. I know everyone has a one last talk. I don't think it at all. And Chris gets up and he says to me, "But McKernan, my life's not wrapped in a bow. I'm still in a pretty shitty place." And I go, "Wouldn't that be cool to share that?"
Yeah, like, it's so cool.
He gets on stage and the name of his talk is "Everything is Awesome, Not." And the reason I love that talk, he didn't wrap it in a bow. He didn't have the magic ending. And the amount of people that came up to him at the end, and in 10 different ways, Ben, various language, various words, pretty much said the same thing. "Thank you for giving me permission to name that I am not happy in my life right now." Because when we go to events, that never, ever happens. And that, to me, is the courage. This movement is not about Philip McKernan. This movement is all about the men and women, including you, who has done a one last talk and who will do a one last talk in the future. It's all about them.
And I can vouch for that is absolutely true with Philip. I'm going to bring it back a little bit to Tofino just because it's interesting. We mentioned it. People wonder what that is. I remember sitting in the room. I'll give them my little story. Sitting in the room, we've been in, I don't even know what you call it, Everest or elevation or the board. It didn't matter. We were in a group journeying for about a year together, meeting 3 times a year at the beautiful locations all over the world. And we're sitting in Tofino. And remember the fire going, and it's just beautiful. You always have the amazing environments, Philip. It's always something I always appreciated. And sitting there, and you start saying, "Hey, look, I just want to tell you a little bit of what I'm up to. I'm doing something where I'm going to bring people. I got a whole group of people going to be speaking, and we're all sitting there like, okay, cool. What are you up to?" And then all of a sudden, you start naming all the speakers, and it was all of our names. It's like Bev, Ben Osterveld, and we were all the keynote speakers. And why I want to tie what you just said was was never about you, even from the birthplace of the whole thing, which was called the Last Summit or something like that. That seems like 100 years ago now, but but it was about us. Like, you're going to and what I think was being on stage is really cool that the whole work you got to work, you almost got to work on pulling that story out of us, pulling our truth out of us, and sometimes had to really pull on it. But I remember going through that process, and it was super life changing. It was really interesting to only speak for 15 minutes. That is an absolute challenge. Any speaker in the world knows it's easier to do a half hour to an hour talk. Easy. 15 minutes is like, holy crap, you can only have truth. You know what I mean? There's no fluff, like, very challenging. So I love the fact that you helped us through all that. But there's one thing too, is I remember going through that, and there was a couple people in the room that said, okay, here's what I want to talk about. And then you pretty much challenged them and you said, is that really true? Can you speak to people connected to their truth? And even like, if someone was thinking of doing a one last talk or reading your book, and they're like, oh, cool, I'll write my one last talk. Like, I've just seen you so many times just call bullshit and say that, I don't know if that's your truth. Can you speak to that a bit, Philip?
Yeah, I think there's two things that happen. One I've already touched on is when somebody comes up with the idea of creating a one last talk, or somebody's invited to create their one last talk and deliver it on a stage. And by the way, don't tune out because you're going, hey, I'm not a speaker and I'm never going to stand on stage and share my truth. Yeah. This is not about that. This is about, we believe every man and woman on earth needs to create their one last talk and deliver it to one other human being in order to free your truth and create the peace of mind that you deeply deserve. But it's not going to happen on its own. And by the way, when you hold that truth, that part of you, as insignificant as it might feel to you, you're actually almost damaging yourself. You're holding on to tension. You're holding on to trauma. You're holding on to a part of yourself that you don't want the world to know about. But all you're doing is damaging yourself. And what happens is you create these invisible walls and you prevent people from connecting with you emotionally. And yet that's what we deeply deserve. That's what we deeply desire as human beings, is to connect. And yet we wonder why we're not connecting, despite the fact we're more socially connected there than ever. But going back to two of the major roadblocks I see, one is people don't believe their story is of value. They might have a part of their story that values, but their truth doesn't matter, Ben. I mean, hang on a second. Let me tell the story about my business, this successful business. No, don't care about that. Tell me about your truth. Well, I've never really talked about that before. And by the way, it's a bit embarrassing and I have some shame and I have some anger towards it. How could that possibly have value? And I'd go as far as to say this. In terms of proportionately, your truth has 1,000 times more value than your business story or success story, your actual story. Totally. And we've seen that for you and for humanity. So that's number one. Number two is then it goes into this phase where people say, okay, I'll do it. And then they start to navigate and search for a cool story, a cool piece of truth. Because I believe that deep down, despite that some human beings don't demonstrate this publicly, I believe deep down we all yearn to make an impact in the world. We all want to leave the world a better place than when we found it. I believe we all want to help humanity and people around us in some shape or form. However, we want to look good doing it. And how do you navigate both of those things? How do you show up in an authentic way and share your truth and look good doing it? That's the Achilles heel. That's the piece that you need to let go of. That's your ego screaming and scraping and grabbing and holding onto this persona, this mask that you've got to do something that looks great. When you can let go of looking good and show up and share your truth, that's magic. And the invitation and the challenge that we present to every single person that goes through the one last talk process is, it's not about you. Or it's about you, but it's not for you. That's the challenge and the invitation. And it's a really challenging thing to navigate because the ego is so strong and it wants to navigate and protect us and support us and make us look good. They're the two big blocks. There's other nuances, of course, but they're the two major blocks we see in humanity as they look at the possibility of creating a one last talk.
I think, such good information. It's such, information doesn't even give it a word, but I'm just thinking about your quote, one of your oldest quotes you got in the action of clarity, take action. And it almost feels like that's the ego killer. That's your ego killer quote, because it's like, because a lot of people don't move and that's where they stay stuck or stay asleep. is that they don't move forward because it's not perfect or if it's not ready or whatever it is. And that's why I feel like your quote from the beginning is it is an ego killer. It kind of tying the dots together in the absence of clarity, take action. And so I want to just ask you about that is let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people are sitting there on the sidelines wanting to be themselves and really tap into who they're designed to be. Tell me a little bit about how we can help these people. What would you say to these people that are stuck or they're not moving forward?
Well, I think a lot of language that's used around people who are in a level or an area of stuckness. I would argue that we're all stuck at some level, and we're all constantly stuck at some level. I don't meet human beings that are unstuck in every aspect of their life. And people say, "Oh, I'm in a moment, I'm in a space of flow, and I'm executing left, right, and center." And I go, "Where? In your business? Great. Talk about your personal life." Well, actually, I don't want to go there, because they're stuck, or vice versa. So when we think about stuckness and we think about people who are not doing enough or whatever it happens to be, I feel that whether we intend this or not, and I do this, Ben, I'm not suggesting you do, but I think I do, and we do as a group of people who are trying to elevate other people or awaken them, is that it almost comes across as we're judging them. We're not judging them, but we're indirectly judging them. It's like, "Oh, you're not awake. You need to wake up. You need to do something."
Yeah, for sure.
I feel that people feel more inadequate. So you also talked about this, people not being awake, and I agree with that. I was fast asleep for years. The challenge is I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Didn't want to see it, couldn't see it. And I was asleep spiritually. I was asleep emotionally. So therefore I couldn't show up in the world. And I was asleep to the possibilities of life, which is, I've never said that before. I was asleep to the possibilities. And people around me try to wake me up, but I didn't want to be awoken. I didn't want to wake up. And the unfortunate reality for many is that we need a catastrophic event, a wake-up call of sorts, in order to jar us to realize how asleep we've been and how great we could be. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to accelerate that process. I'm trying to wake people up just that little bit sooner, the ones that want to be awoken.
Yeah.
And I would like people to just not sit here and go, "Am I asleep or am I awake?" Just assume you're asleep.
Yeah, exactly.
Make the natural assumption that there's a part of your spirit, there's a part of your soul. It is out for the count, as my dad would say. It's out, it's gone. And there's not an alarm clock on earth that is going to wake it up unless you want to. That to me is the starting point. And I look at my life right now, which is not perfect. And if I try to pretend it was, you'd see bullshit, and everyone listening to this in the future would smell bullshit intuitively. And I'm looking at my life, and while there's many things going really well, and I believe in so many things we're doing, I'm deeply curious about the work inside me that has yet to be born. Yeah. But it's not judgment. That's the ultimate killer here. When there's judgment present, there is no growth. And I'm going to say that again. When there's 100%. Judgment present, there's no growth. You will never wake up and find out what you're meant to do when you get older. You will never find your passion, purpose, or whatever when you're too busy judging yourself for staying in a job, a business, a city, a relationship for 10 years that you shouldn't have done because you're too busy beating yourself up. You're never going to find the peace of mind that you need in order to find the creativity that lies within you to go and make an impact in the world.
Yeah. 100%. We're all sleeping. Where are we sleeping?
Just assume we're all asleep, and don't judge it. Just accept it.
It's amazing, Philip, because I work with people as well, and it's funny when I start getting on a call or I'm doing any kind of coaching, and as soon as I hear judgment, I literally can't coach them. I have to be like, okay, first of all, you're beating the shit out of yourself, and there's no room to receive anything. It's almost like it's just like you have to deal with that before I can even wake someone up or help them or even impact their business life and relationships in any way. It's like it's so true, and I can attest to that because it's like. You just hear someone beating themselves up, or you just hear them judging, or I'm not good enough, or someone else. I have to unwind that. You can't get to them. It just seems like right. It's the dead stop, and I think that's everybody, even me. You know,
if we could record how we feel, think, and even internally or externally what we say to ourselves, and we could play it back to ourselves in a moment where we're just really open and more awake. I think we would be astounded of how we hold ourselves and how we speak about ourselves and the way in which we treat ourselves. And it is astonishing. And I know this to be true, not professionally necessarily, but I do, but also personally. I mean, no one has ever spoken to me as badly as I've spoken to myself. And there are some people go, well, whoa. Before we continue too far down this fluffy doves flying around, everything's awesome, tree hugging conversation. Let's just hold on a second here. Because I'm so hard on myself, I've used that energy and that drive to build, a great real estate business. I'm one of the best realtors in Calgary because of this, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, well, I said, hang on a second. Yes, it's got you going. But that energy is you're moving from what you don't want as opposed to moving to what you do want. And that energy is exhausting. Just even ask yourself, just stop for a second and ask yourself, is it possible that you are absolutely and utterly exhausted? Not because you just had a baby and you're up all night, not because you just, opened a new business and you're on, building a new website until 3:00 in the morning, but are you exhausted? And if you are exhausted, why do you stay so busy? What are you running from? What are you hiding from?
Yeah.
What do you not want to see in yourself?
Yeah. Something I have to ask myself all the time. Just to always check in, being ambitious and giving her everything I got and enjoying every second of it most of the time. There's definitely that question has to be asked on an ongoing basis. Something we've worked on, me and you, for over the years. You know what I mean? So it's definitely something. I think we have our shadows, and I feel like the shadows just stay with us. But what's cool, it's just a shadow. Where's that shadow casting now? It's like, okay, check in. And when I think we know our priorities, when we're really clear on what we want, it's pretty easy to let go of what's causing that insanity, that push. Like, you can just let it go. Like, the end of it, once you feel like you've lost, you almost lost, or you feel that pain, and you're like, I don't want that again. I think it's just, you just know what's important. So, but you said something, I think, again, it's just tying in some stuff we've done before. And we always notice people that, including ourselves, that don't want to be seen at some level. And I feel like when you're talking about how, like, of course you wouldn't want to be seen if we were listening to your inner dialogue. You know what I mean? It's like we find out who we really are. It's like this great fear that people find. I see it in everybody I work with. It's like, if they only knew. It's something I've been unwinding, trying to be seen as much and honestly as I can, let the cards fall where they fall. But can you speak to, and I think that's why the One Last Talk has a side benefit of people are going to be seen. You know what I mean? What does that mean to you, Philip, when to be seen?
Well, I think all of us carry shame. All of us carry regret. And all of us carry stories and things that have been done to us and things that we've done to other people that we simply don't want to acknowledge. And we don't want the world to see, because we're ashamed of those things. And we feel deep down that we're going to be judged by those people for the actions that we've taken and the inactions that we have not taken. And I believe to my core that the only way that we can fully show up and allow ourselves to be seen is by showing up and allowing yourselves to be seen, literally, and sharing the things that we don't want to share, allowing people to see all of us. And if you choose not to do that, that's okay. It's simply a choice. But don't expect to be happy. Don't expect to be fulfilled. Don't expect to have peace. Don't expect to be loved and be able to love in the way that you expect and want. Just know that when you hide a part of you away, it's not like the chapter of a book that you can skip. It's a part of who you are. Every one of us, I've yet to meet a human being, Ben, that doesn't have a story and are part of their story or part of their truth that they just simply don't want to have in their life. I like Ben's story, chapter 1 to 6. But my chapter 7 is horrendous. Or my chapter 1 to 6 is great. My chapter 7 is horrendous. I want Ben's chapter 7. Now, 8's cool, 9's great, and I'm looking forward to chapter 15, 20, whatever. But a lot of us have these parts of our lives that we simply don't give birth, like we don't allow them to come out. We don't give them focus. We don't honor them. And what we're doing is walking through earth, expecting the world and the universe to provide us with the clarity of what our purpose is, to provide us with the opportunities and the possibilities, and for people to love us the way that we deserve and can be loved. But yet we've hidden a part of us away. We're not showing up fully. So a lot of us don't want to be seen because we're afraid if people see us for who we really are, they may not like what they see. And my challenge and my absolute belief and my promise, it is the only time that people can see you and accept you for all of who you are is when you show up and give them all of who you are.
And to give them all of who you are is all of who you are that you absolutely know right now.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I love the lineup. You got my best right now. This is my best. Like, it's just something I've come to terms with too. I've always tried to, this whole idea about becoming enlightened and like, oh, I'm going to fix what I've got problems. And like, I've realized now in the last, even in the last year, it's really hit home how let's just say that, I don't know, you work too much. Well, sometimes that's how it is right now. Like, or you're angry. Yeah. I'm a bit angry still right now. Like, it's almost like there's a place of it's just who I am. And it almost feels like you actually can move forward and reach some level of enlightenment by just absolutely accepting exactly who you are. Like, I'm not saying to be stuck there. I'm always trying to be going forward. But yeah, it's just really cool to see that you don't have to be enlightened. You just got to be seen. This is who I am. And it's almost like the energy goes away. If someone says, hey, Ben, you're an asshole, I go, yeah, sometimes I am. It's almost like if I was hiding it, no, I'm not. No. And it's almost like, and that's the exhausting side of things, right? It's almost like once you just be who you are, you can actually grow at probably light speed, really. It's just, it's funny if we only knew.
It's funny. I'm going to give a real life example of this. And it's, I was going to caveat by saying this is an extreme example, but it's not an extreme example. This is a human piece of truth. So we ran one last talk in Boulder in Colorado. And the very first, one of the speakers stood up and talked about committing murder in his opening line. With another lady, Neely, who stood up and talked about being sexually abused as a young child. And for people who don't know One Last Talk, or people who've not experienced it, they might look in from the outside and go, well, what's the purpose of that?
How good.
And number two is, I can't relate to that anyway. So what would the purpose of me be sitting in the audience? Well, actually, with respect, I would ask you to challenge those nuances.
Yeah.
So Neely never imagined that she would ever talk about this. Never mind talk about it in public. Neely had done what a lot of us do by burying that story and thinking that it's not as significant as it feels when she connects with it. And she went beyond herself. She went out of herself to know that when I share this is about me, but it's not for me. She embraced the essence of what One Last Talk is really about. And she stood on that stage and shared her truth for the first time ever in a most beautiful, poetic, stunning way. She then inspired a woman who was in the audience. I did not know her story, but I knew her. She's sitting in the audience, Lena. And Lena's sitting there with her story about sexual abuse that she had buried so deep in her consciousness. She had put in a box, buried in the ground, put a metaphoric motorway on top of it, or highway. She'd built a hotel on top of that. And there was no way on earth, Ben, the story was coming out. There was no way on earth it was going to affect her. But by pouring so much energy into making sure it wasn't affecting her, it was driving subconsciously almost everything in her life. There was a deep anxiety and fear that she carried every day, and an insecurity and a scarcity that was showing up in relationships and business and everything else. Lena's sitting in that audience in Boulder. She connects with the story and realizes the power of this story and the fact that it's controlling her more than she wants to admit. What most people don't know, and she's been honest enough to talk about this, is she's a dark-skinned lady, and she'd been developing these white spots on her skin, on her chest, and all over her back. Her body was literally screaming at her to honor this pain. Dermatologists, blood tests, MRIs, nothing had shown up. Nothing had shown up that she had any irregularity with her skin. There was no creams and steroids. Nothing could get rid of the spots. After Boulder, the spots on their own started to dissipate.
Crazy.
She stood on stage 3 months later in Toronto.
Awesome.
In a little cafe at One Last Talk local, and shared her story with tears rolling down her face. Her brother's in the room. He didn't know anything about her being raped. And she looks across and she says, one of the main reasons I'm here today sharing the story is because of the courage of that lady there. And she pointed to Neely, who was her inspiration.
Awesome.
Now, I want people to know two things. One, that is one example of story, pain, truth, etc. But please don't allow that story to suppress a truth inside of you by saying something along the lines of, oh my God, I thought I had a One Last Talk, but now I don't have anything as dramatic as that. Because there is a dramatic nature to that.
Yeah.
There's a violent nature to that, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't mean that it's more powerful than anybody else's story or anybody else's truth, because the pain that we carry is the same across, I believe, across humanity. The circumstances in which we receive that pain is different. The things that trigger that pain is different, but my pain and your pain, Ben, I believe is the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been given to us and inherited and accepted and brought into our consciousness in different ways.
Yeah. We could end the podcast on about 5 different spots. I feel like I do have a couple more questions. I think that it's amazing. But I do really believe there's some more value here. You said something about honor your pain. I want you to clarify, what the heck does that mean?
You know what? There are gurus in India. There is Wikipedia. There is Google. There is bookshops in most big cities and small towns all over the world. There's Amazon, where you can get every resource under the sun in relation to literature and new concepts and everything else. And yet, despite the fact that all of those things make sense and all those things can add value, I don't believe there's a greater teacher on earth than pain.
Mm.
And yet it is the very thing that we as humanity, we as people are trying to avoid.
Yeah.
And our brain tries to avoid it for us because it goes into a protective mechanism. If a child walks up to a fire, not that I would ever want my child to get burned, but if they get too hot or they burn themselves slightly or significantly in fire, they'll never go back to that fire again. In other words, the pain has taught them that this is dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. But pain is one of the greatest teachers on earth. It can tell us so much about who we are. It can tell us so much about the things that we do. It can really tell us who we are going to be to some extent. And yet it's the thing that we spend very little time on. And the pain typically comes from the past. And it shows up in the present. And I promise you it's determining your future if you refuse to look at it. Because most of us want to live in the now, which I have a fundamental issue with. If my now is not very happy, I don't want to live in the now. I want to escape the now. So a lot of us want to live in the now, or we're very forward focused. And the big goal is to stop being as forward focused as we want to be and to try to live in the present and take in our kids and to embrace everything that's going around us. Feast on what we have right now as opposed to focusing on the future. I believe the way to do that, and the only way to do that, I've never said that before, the only way to do that is to go back into your past and to dismantle your past and to let go of your past and to forgive your past and to accept the rest of it. And then the peace of mind you have today allows you to connect more today. And then you worry less about the future.
Yeah, totally. I can 100% agree with that. 100%. There was a question I was wondering. I think what we're watching and experience on this podcast is the amount of thought, effort, passion, pain, exploratory time and frustration to get to a place where you have a book, you've got One Last Talk, you got One Last Talk local, you're crazy focused. I just want to talk about the times that we've had conversations where you didn't know what the heck One Last Talk was. And I just want to know, did you ever want to just give up in this thing?
Absolutely. 100%. I wanted to give it up because I didn't know what it was. I wanted to give it up because I didn't know what it could be. I wanted to give it up because I didn't know what to do with it. And I wanted to give it up because I was so scared of how powerful it could be. And I wanted to give it up partly because I was afraid that this wasn't about me, because it wasn't stirring my ego necessarily, and because it didn't allow me to be significant in the world. I wanted to give it up because it didn't facilitate that. And what I realized, it is not about Philip McKernan. In fact, I've refused point blank, even today, I refuse somebody else. And I say refuse sounds dramatic, but I will never sign a copy of the One Last Talk book, ever. And the reason I say that is that is me paying homage to the men and women who have written and done their One Last Talks and the men and women that are going to do their One Last Talks in the future. But it's very easy to allow my ego to take over the movement and say it's all about me. Yeah, I founded the concept. Yes, I came up with it. Yes, I created space. Absolutely. And I will continue to drive it. But I wanted to give up One Last Talk so many times.
I remember many times hearing the anguish of carrying this. It just seemed like you had this thing you're birthing, and it's like, what do I do with it? How do you scale it? How do you not scale it? Do I sell it? Do I franchise it? Like, just that whole process. I think a lot of people can relate to that who also have a One Last Talk style vision to impact this world. And I think it's good to hear someone that I think we're really seeing it. I think we're just at the beginning. But I think as we come, I think we just always remember that's something that we almost was going to give up. I think many people give up before we see a movement happen.
And one of the reasons for that, Ben, I see, if I think about it just purely through the lens of One Last Talk, I think it's important sometimes to have a vision. I think it's important to have a strategy. But I do believe when it comes to things that are more in the spiritual realm, the things that are more deeply emotionally connected within us, I don't think that those constructs and those plans actually serve a movement. I think what they do is they inhibit it, and they make it overwhelming, and they actually end up bringing it in directions that it shouldn't actually go. It's not meant to go. So people are saying, how are you scaling this and how are you monetizing it?
Of course.
And I go, I don't know yet. And they go, what's wrong with you? Like, they're almost trying to make me feel inadequate, but something wrong with me. I actually think it's something deeply right, not within me, but within what we're doing. Right now, we're not monetizing it. We don't want to suddenly charge or ask our leaders, we're calling One Last Talk leaders in different cities around the world who want to take it, suddenly a licensing fee. We may choose to charge a small licensing fee in a year or 2 years to cover all the things that we're doing to support the concept. But right now, we don't know what we have right now. And the minute we inject costs and money into it, suddenly then that person in Edmonton or that person in London or that person in Sydney has to then say, geez, I paid for this. I've got to put bums on seats. I've got to sell extra burgers in order to get that money back. And then suddenly the energy and the essence of this experience changes overnight. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just right now, it doesn't feel right. Mm. So right now, we're just navigating. We're allowing people to move in. We're attracting beautiful men and women who want to get behind it and support it. That's all I know right now. And do I carry a burden with it? Like, yes, but I feel that it's been lessened by the men and women who want to take this to the world. This is a gift to the world. We want to gift this to the world. And I don't even know what that fucking means right now, Ben. All I know is that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Now, I do want to wrap it up. I think this has been rich, beyond rich. And I think if we just keep going, I think it will be diluted to a point where we just add more for no reason. I just have this idea of, if you were to speak to someone listening to this, I'd like you to speak to that person who's sitting there. Like, I get emotional about it. I don't know why. But speak to that person that needs to talk, needs to wake up, and just and encourage them. And chat with them and challenge them. If you could do that, if that doesn't feel like it's your thing, then don't. But I think someone's needing to hear you.
Okay. So if there's somebody sitting there right now in some shape or form, and they don't feel deserving of stepping out into the world, they don't feel they are deserving of doing a One Last Talk to themselves or anybody else for that matter, what I would go as far as to say to them with respect is, you are depriving the world of who you are. You are depriving the world of who you are. If you do not step up and step out, you are literally not allowing the world to see you, all of you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what happens is that is a catastrophic effect. If you are a parent, your kids don't get to see who you could be. This is not designed to make you feel guilty or to beat you up, because you're good at that yourself. I guarantee you, if you're somebody sitting there and you do not believe you're showing up in this world and you're not feeling good enough about yourself in the world, you are somebody that beats the shit out of yourself in ways that you would never speak to your worst enemy. Okay? I'm not going to give you a 3-step system to get rid of that internal dialogue, because I don't believe that'll work. I believe the question you need to ask is, when did you get the fax? When did you get the email? When did somebody send you a text, or what webinar did you sit on where somebody asked you or gave you permission, or you gave yourself permission to speak to yourself with such language and such disdain? And you can do 2 things. You can wallow and get lost in it and continue to show up and prove to yourself in the world that you're not good enough. Or you can go beyond that and go beyond yourself and make the rest of your life about everybody else. And there is nothing more richer and more beautiful and more poetic and more extraordinary on earth to have the privilege to impact the world. But I want to qualify impact very quickly. Impact is not about writing a book. Impact is not about creating a movement called One Last Talk. Impact is not about, this is not one of those conversations where you need to do what Ben or Philip is doing or anybody else is doing. Impact is about impacting your community, your family, yourself, your husband, your wife. Impact comes in various different ways. But my biggest thing is stop depriving the world of your gift and get up and stop making it about you. And that will give you the courage and the focus to show up a little bit differently every day. That's all I have right now.
Thank you so much, Philip. I think it's great to have you on the show, and I think it's extremely powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much.